Hey everybody, this is Patrick Escolas, and we're here at the first ever Banyan Users Conference Connect 2022 at downtown Cleveland at the Hilton. And this is the first episode of Tire Tracks. We're making history with Banyan's first podcast, and I've been voluntold that I am the host. Couldn't be more excited, but I'll try to be. No, but really, I'm very happy to have Reinke here as my first guest, and she had some awesome things to say just for our attendees here a few minutes ago. And Ann, first off, again, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Patrick. I appreciate the invitation. This is summertime Santa Claus, in case you were wondering, and he's giving the gift of knowledge.
I'm getting it for sure. Whether or not I can translate it, that's going to be left up for debate.
Yes.
So, Ann, you had some great things to say just for our attendees. For anybody watching this after the fact or who couldn't make it, can you give me kind of a quick recap or summary of what you had to say?
Sure. So there's a couple phenomenons we've seen throughout the pandemic. Obviously, people are aware of the brokerage industry now. They didn't necessarily used to be. The supply chain became a brutal reality to a lot of people because they couldn't get the kind of toilet paper they were used to, or they couldn't bring their kids the gifts that they said that they wanted. So we are using that as an opportunity to try to make sure that people understand that we're bigger than we have been. Our industry has expanded, our industry has grown, and we've become more sophisticated. So we always work excellently in times of market dislocation. And of course, we've had a market dislocation for 2 years. But what our shippers have seen is that they can turn to us and rely on us just as in the ordinary course of events, and they want to, because we have access to specialized equipment, for example. We have relationships with drivers so that we can kind of magnify capacity, which was, as you know, in short supply over the last 2 years. And so we really are deemed a solution for those who may not have known about us as a solution before.
And this is TIA you're talking about here, and I apologize for not putting that in the foreground,
Sure.
but TIA, is this, you kind of spoke to where you are now, kind of a pivot. Why did TIA come about in the first place? What was the reason for its for its beginning?
Yes. So TIA, Transportation Intermediaries Association, we represent the brokerage industry, those who are 3PL professionals. And the origination of it was we wanted to have an organization that was best in class. So brokers, have had a storied history. They weren't always part of the transaction. They used to be an arm of the carrier.
Okay.
And they became a third party over the last 20 years. And so there were some commonalities of interest of people who wanted to have resources into how do they get to be better. Mm-hmm. Or if let's say they're starting a brokerage, they have a phone and a desk. That's not all you need. You kind of need to know more. So how do you get the education for that? How do you meet the people that you need to meet in order to expand, to scale your business? And so that the association started with those sort of small, necessary origins, and now have really become a network of individuals who want to be the best.
And that's awesome because, to me, you say that started when brokerage was new and 20 years ago, but that seems so standard and like it's always been that way for someone like myself that's just about a year into the logistics space. How do you gain the insight on the industry as a whole? Is that something where you're just talking to each person, or where's that information coming from?
Sure. So a couple different ways. We have a market report that we issue every quarter. Mm-hmm. That's based on our member data about what is affecting them. So we've broken it out into intermodal, LTL, and truckload. Okay. And so we'll see what their volumes were, what their revenue was, and their margins, and how it is affected quarter over quarter. And so we have that every quarter. But what I'm trying to do is get more regularized data. So we have that same pool of members. They provide data. But I also want to know, all right, what are those members who aren't contributing? Okay. What are they experiencing? And so I talked to our membership team about how best to get that knowledge and harness it, because we are thought leaders in this space. And how can I talk about it, let's say in a communications, if we're talking about the trends in the industry, I want to make sure that I'm reflecting the latest from our members. So we're working on that.
Right. You can't be talking about a trend from 5 years ago when you're saying you're on the forefront of the industry thought process.
That's right.
So a few of the things that you talked about that I thought were big issues that kind of it resonated across. So was this the AB5? Can you pretend I don't know
Sure.
what that is? Because at a part of me, I got it from some of the context.
Yep.
But that's not something I've been keeping a finger on the pulse of. What is that whole situation?
Sure.
There?
So this is so funny how it originated. So the state of California, as you know, they're aggressive about just about everything.
It's California.
It's California,
yeah.
right? So this originated with the plight of the Uber driver,
Okay.
and the Uber driver is an independent contractor, and they thought
They were getting taken advantage
they
of.
were taking advantage of. Now, did Uber drivers think that? I don't know if it even matters. So the state of California determined that these independent contractors were essentially employees for all intents and purposes,
Right.
and yet they were treated as an independent contractor, and so weren't prevailing on the benefits, et cetera, the sort of infrastructure that you would get as part of a company.
Mm-hmm.
So the law was passed. Unfortunately for us, there were unintended consequences, right? So there were industries that you wouldn't have even thought about who
So the
got swept
wording
up.
was kind of vague.
It
and
was
didn't,
vague.
Oh,
It didn't just say, "Hey, Uber, you guys, these are your employees." It was so vague. It was almost interpreted that a whole bunch of industries, including owner operators and motor carriers, could be swept up into it. And so that is what we found. Now, funnily enough, Uber got themselves exempted.
Of course.
As did a number of industries, but I don't know.
This sounds like policy right there.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. But the California Trucking Association brought suit against the state of California. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court decided not to act on it.
Okay.
So we're back to where we think it's going to be enforced by the state of California, but worse, because it's so vague, it is ripe for trial lawyers to interpret it and determine, okay, we think that independent contractor, that motor owner operator should, for all intents and purposes, be considered an employee, and we're going to file suit.
So what does this mean to the logistics industry as a whole? Like that, I understand that. Does that just mean that there's going to be people that saying this isn't worth it for me to be an owner operator anymore, or there's going to be less of a pool to get resources from to move all these shipments? What does that mean?
I think you're exactly right. I think it's going to have a direct impact on capacity, which is already a deer, right?
Yeah.
And so there are those in California who say, I don't want to get swept up into it, right? Or
Too much of a hassle.
Too much of a hassle. They don't want to have the situation where they're going to have to comply with regulations, or they're going to have to somehow determine whether or not they're going to get sued. They're not going to want to do it. So they're going to move themselves out of the state or out of the business. I think that's a first. The second is, what's it going to do to freight agents? So brokers, we have freight agents who by and large are independent contractors. So how is that going to affect our relationship? Are they going to be considered employees? So under the law, there's these business to business exemptions, and there's
Okay.
about 12 or 13 of them. But again,
If you got enough monies and lawyers, you can get
Yeah,
away with
exactly.
it. But
So
the middle guy and the little guy are
Right.
getting stomped.
Right. And so we're just concerned, too, that it starts in California and it spreads east. So there are already states that are looking at it. And
Yep.
so that's just going to affect the supply chain, which already has been disrupted over the last few years.
And I mean, disrupted's a good word for
Yeah.
it. Now, kind of my last comment on this, because it came up to me. So there's unintended, maybe negative consequences of it. Are there any positives that could come out of this for the industry? Out of sheer curiosity, is there some glimmer? Or is there a better vetting process now, or are the places or the carriers that are adhering to this? Do the drivers, are they getting added benefits? What's on the plus side, if any?
Gosh, I'm so used to being negative that it's hard to see the positive. But I guess
I like to be devil's advocate because I'm thinking both sides, because I don't know enough, either way.
So I guess there probably are situations where there are owner operators who only have one shipper that they work for,
Okay.
or one larger carrier that they work for. So in that situation, sure, there could be a benefit to that person. But most of the owner operators have any number of customers or clients. So I don't know if there's that much of a benefit.
Got you.
The only other thing I think of is that there are those who are interested in opening up a brokerage arm as a way of dealing with this. And so potentially that means there are more brokerages, but we have to make sure that those people are doing it the right way and are ethical and all of that and know what the regulations are. And I'll just give a pitch for TIA for a second since I should.
That's what we're here for. I mean, we already got Banyan
everywhere
else, so TIA can get some time. Yeah.
So we are developing an independent contractor course precisely because we think there will be more entrants in the brokerage space as they try to navigate and try to figure out, all right, how can we get through this, or how do we actually make money out of this, or what can we do? And so we want to make sure that they do it the right way.
No, and you were talking about some of the unethical things that can happen there, and kind of gets me on somewhere else we were talking about that you guys are playing as advocates for and that we talked about. So tell me about this again. 80,000 complaints and nothing getting done on kind of the double booking and these kind of illegitimate practices.
Yeah.
But recap that, because I thought that was really, that caught me immediately, because you hear about some of the things, see stuff on social media about, man, this is terrible. But that number and the lack of anything kind of blew me away, and I know that's something you guys are fighting for at TIA.
It just seems so counterintuitive that there is a law that establishes what a broker is. There is a forum for people to complain when they think that law is being violated, right? The Consumer Complaint Database. And there is a penalty system which you can use to find these bad actors. So it's sort of baffling as to why none of that actually happens.
We've gotten all the way from A to X, but we can't get to Z, right? Like those last few letters, that something's not right.
And it's hard to know. Look, so the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, of course, they're strapped for resources. It's entirely possible that they can't chase down, and you mentioned it, 80,000 complaints, but this is over a 10-year history.
Right.
So you'd like to think that there is an enforcement arm. We're not entirely sure if they feel reluctant to enforce the law, if they don't have the resources to enforce the law. But look, the law exists, so you sort of think, well, the law exists. That's the first step. So surely, and here we're self-interested in this, of course, because when you have illegal brokering, that makes brokers look bad, even if we're not implicated in the slightest. Right. And it also leads to unsafe practices. If you lose control of your load, let's say you broker it to a motor carrier, or the motor carrier brokers it to somebody else, then we have no idea where that load went.
Right, there's no visibility, no idea on the liability of it
Exactly.
either. So that's where it comes into play.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate that, because like I said, that immediately hit. So going back, where we've been talking kind of a few points on more the legal policy side here, we're getting into kind of fourth quarter for peak season for a lot of it. What is all of this? And I know you kind of have the finger on the pulse. What does that mean? What's a good way for the people in the logistics space to have a good fourth quarter, knowing all this?
Well, you said peak season. It's been not super peaky, right?
Right. That's why people are nervous.
Yes, they are. And they should be, in the sense that if they're totally retail facing, this is something that should concern them. Because as you know, except for the auto space, inventories are, and we heard it today, are bloated. That's a great way of framing it. So we've got a bloated inventory for most of our retailers. So
But it's somewhere bloated else than actually in front of us.
Yes, that's fair. That's fair. I think there's still the market is still strong, demand is still strong. It's not as strong as it was.
Okay.
We're moving back to reality. 2 years has been unreal. So we're still capable of doing well. I would say this: our economists have said that, and what's wonderful about our industry is we are always nimble and pivot in whatever we can do to make sure that we are sort of serving our customers and serving ourselves. So they suggest the manufacturing is still a huge, strong growth output for our country. So if they can start diversifying their reach into not just retail shippers, but also manufacturing shippers, that can help soften the blow. And we're talking about fourth quarter, but I think that's going into 2023, which, you and I can talk about. But I think that that's something to think about is, all right, what do we see the trends are coming? There's still a lot of manufacturing output. There's still the trucks that need to be built. There's still any number of heavy equipment and machinery that needs to be built. So how can I get into those lanes?
So it's really about diversifying not only the lanes, but maybe that source of revenue, that source of deals. Okay, that makes sense. I think that's something that is Now, how would someone do that? Would they just go by networking? Would they pick up,
Yeah.
do they go walk down the shop and say, hey, you're a manufacturer, I got a truck, let's go,
Right. Well, so it's interesting you say that, because I think some of our folks, their sales cycle are much longer than you would anticipate.
Mm-hmm.
And they continue to work through these same shippers to get them comfortable with the idea of using the brokerage, and how, if they've never used one before, or if that's not a client they've had in the past, how they can use us and what we can produce. So this is sort of related. One of our members has been for years in the pharmaceutical space.
Okay.
And over the last 2 years, got into vaccine distribution.
Makes sense.
Right.
Ideologically,
Exactly.
it's close.
Yeah. And so how did he do it? Well, because he had access to the specialized equipment you need. For example, the vaccines, had to stay real cold.
I was just say reefer equipment
Yeah,
at that
so
point.
he knew how to get that equipment and had a line on it. And so that's what I think, what we can do is, here's how we can showcase our advantages. So this is why you should use us. And in that particular instance, he had the relationships, he had the equipment, he had the specialized knowledge, and they said, oh my God, why would we do this any other way? Why would we try to chase down capacity ourselves when we can have our broker do it for us?
So it sounds like, outside of the kind of logistics, it's not logistics knowledge, it's kind of all knowledge, because at some point everything's got to move, unless you're completely in the software space, or okay, that's something we throw about. We talk logistics, but really we're talking about everything. We're talking about medicine, manufacturing, commercial, and everything in between. So we've talked about it, and we've just discussed that we are talking about everything. But so we talked about, like, fourth quarter, what they can do to kind of adapt for that. How disruptive the supply chain has been in 2022 and the year before, past 12 to 18 months. What does 2023 look like? Does it get crazier? What do we get, a new normal? What are you and TIA? What does that look like?
Yeah, I tend to think we saw what Brent Hutto said. Mm-hmm. We saw what Matthew said from Yellow. I tend to think it becomes a normalized market, which, to those who started a brokerage in 2021, is going to feel like a depression, but I don't think it will be. I think it will be a more normalized market. That being said, I do think the retail space will continue to be challenged. And why? Inflation, right? Mm-hmm. The cost of goods.
Right.
We already know the real estate prices, because of interest rates, have slowed. And so what impact will that have on home building, for example, right? Like, wood and stone and blah, 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 blah. So, I think that's something to be concerned about and will have an impact, but I do think there is still a lot of demand out there, particularly in manufacturing.
Well, I mean, that's got to be hopeful to hear for anyone listening to this, anyone in the space, because, like you said, could have got it in this, like, this is great, and looking at projections, like, what are we going to do now? Right. So, and we've talked about, like, next year. So what does 5 years look like for the space? I mean, with a lot of, they're talking about automation within some of the, self-driving trucks. We're talking about automation on the data side. What does 5 years look like from now, just as a, what is your thought on that?
Yeah. So it's interesting, too. So 5 years from, we already have 27,000 brokers. I tend to think that we're going to get more, but I also see the impact of private equity, hedge funds, who are interested in consolidation. They're interested in purchasing because they see a growing line of business that there is never going to not be a need for. So why wouldn't they try? And they already have. You see it all the time, right? Yeah. And so some of our members, God bless them, they're trying to scale up and ultimately try to be an appealing purchase for those private equity. So I see, while continuous expansion, there is that level of, all right, there is going to be some consolidation there too.
And that makes sense. It's not necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
I mean, it was kind of the Wild West for a minute there.
Yeah. Good Lord. Right.
No, and but yeah, I like thinking about it that way, because that's kind of where the natural shift. It's got to, if it went one way, then it's kind of got to come back. And I think Brent Hutto said it was like, we're not in this equilibrium. Is not what this industry is
That's
about.
Right.
And I thought that was huge. So we talked about present, 5 years from now. If you got the venue, and I'm sure other people will put a microphone and a camera in front of you, but what's one message you have for everybody in the industry now? What's kind of a parting shot or a takeaway from anything and everything here?
Well, I think that you want to strive towards continuous improvement, not just for yourself, but for your business. And the only way to do that is to stay current with the people who are in your space and the education that is out there. And how do you do that? Well, we have the resources. So we have meetings, and literally for the 3PL industry, those are where you get to meet the best of the people who have done maybe what you've already done and learn from it. And then you have education that we try to keep current. Like I mentioned, this independent contractor court. We're trying to look ahead. We're not just reacting to what is happening today. We want to look ahead. And it's incumbent on you, I think, if you don't stay current, you don't stay relevant, and then you lose business. And there's plenty of people out there who are happy to take the business from you.
And then just there was the one quote you gave when you talk about the TA and education. It's like, I learned that I don't know enough, right?
That's right. That's right.
And I think that's kind of where the starting point that you kind of need to get to, right?
Yeah.
Figure out what you don't know and figure out what you need to know real fast.
Exactly right. And implement.
Yeah, implement. Exactly. Well, Ann, it has been a pleasure talking to you. You have been our first victim on the Banyan podcast. And,
Patrick, you did a nice job.
Summertime
Congrats.
Santa
Summertime
has got to do pretty well.
The gift of knowledge.
That's right. The
Summertime
gift
Santa.
of knowledge for everybody. Again, Ann, thank you so much.
you.
You made this easy. And thank you. We'll have a lot more episodes coming soon. Thank you.